You're listening to Sarah Hagan Backstage, with interviews and insights from years inside the music industry. Join Sarah as she talks with masters of their crafts, finding out what makes them tick, both inside and outside of the music business.
Welcome to Sarah Hagan Backstage. My guest today, Antonio Sanchez, is a Grammy Award-winning drummer and composer who has played with an amazing array of musicians in multiple genres over his past decades in the music industry. Today, we are going to talk about the music that shaped his personal sound, his journey as a drummer and musician, learning to play musically, and the many incredible projects he has done, including the soundtrack to the movie Birdman and his 2017 album Bad Hombre, as well as what amazing things are on the horizon. So come along with me as I catch up with Antonio Sanchez. Antonio, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. Good to see you. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
And where are you right now? Are you at home?
Yeah, at home in New York. After traveling a little bit for Christmas and New Year's and all that stuff, we went to see family in Florida and Mexico. And now we're back dealing with my studio that got flooded back in September.
Yes.
Thanks to Hurricane Ida. We
Mhm.
totally lost the studio and we had to demolish everything. But now we're almost back up. And I think this weekend I should be able to get back in there and start setting stuff up again. So I'm very happy about that.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. I'm really glad to hear that. That was something I was going to ask you about, how things were going, because I think all of us were following along on Instagram with you and Thana, and like just your my gosh, seeing all the instruments, and you were able to save some things that were important, right? Just pull them
Yeah.
out of there.
I mean, for the most part, the gear was fine because we saw the water coming in and we started just bringing stuff up. Some drums got wet, but drums are resilient. That's a
Mhm.
good thing about that. But yeah, it was kind of traumatic just to see all that water just gushing, and it was not from the outside. It was water that came in from the sewer line. So it was all dirty water, and all of a sudden we started seeing stuff floating around in the
Oh
studio
no.
in the basement. It was horrible. But luckily, insurance has been cool. Then the insurance has to give the money to the mortgage company, and then they release the money to make sure that you are actually doing what you said you were going to do with the
Sure.
construction. And because most people don't have a recording studio in their basement, then they were like, "Well, why so expensive?" Because that's
Mm.
the estimate that a contractor gave us was like really really high. But the insurance was cool, and then everything
Good.
has been kind of smooth sailing.
That's
I
good.
mean,
That's so
it's taken a
good.
long time, but we're almost there, so I'm super happy about it. And also, all the stuff that was in the studio, we had to bring up into the house.
Mhm.
So I never knew how many cymbals I had until I had to carry them all up. It was like I had bags and bags and bags of cymbals, which I absolutely adore, and I don't want to get rid of anything, of course. But it was just incredible amounts of gear that we have in the top part of the house. So we don't have our house either. So we're gonna get our house back and the studio back and everything back at the same time. So it's nice.
Yes, that will be so good. I'm very, very happy for you both
Yeah.
about
Thank
that.
you.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
And so that on top of what we've, all been dealing with this past 2 years was a lot. How have you been through the pandemic?
Ups and downs like everybody, I think. Um, I've tried my best to be productive, of course. Now that we couldn't go out and play for a long time, we couldn't perform, we couldn't do what we like, and that I started noticing was bringing some really bad, like emotional consequences
Mhm.
because of not being able to focus your energy in what you usually do, which to me, performing is very meditative. You are doing something incredibly concentrated, is absolutely immersive. What you're doing when you're playing, when you're improvising, especially when I'm playing jazz, which, you never know what's going to happen. You never know which way it's going to go. So it requires all of your brain, all of your spirit, all of your emotional um, side of your being, and your physical side, of course. So to
Mhm.
not have that, and to not being able to focus my energy on that for such a long time, was brutal. It's been really hard. And what I did was, actually, I started taking flying lessons, because I figured, something that I can be fully concentrated on, and I would get a little bit of kind of the same high,
Mhm.
except that, of course, learning to fly, I didn't know how to fly. I'm still learning, of course, but to learn something new during this time, I think, was also very, very useful,
Yes.
because I just felt stuck, like most people
Mhm.
did. And even though I was doing a lot of stuff in my studio, I still felt like that part of the meditative aspect of the music, because even when I'm recording, I can stop and start and stop and start. It's not really, as committed to like 2 hours of your life that you have to do this thing in front of people, which is also a
Mhm.
little bit like tightrope walking.
Mhm.
So I really miss that aspect of things. So it's been hard. It has some silver linings, of course, and, being home and getting healthier and working out and doing all these things. But
Mhm.
it's, I'm not gonna lie to you. There's been very, very hard days,
Yeah.
better days. Thankfully, Tana is a godsend, and we've been dealing with it the best way we can, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm sure it does help to have a spouse who knows exactly how you're feeling, with the industry being what it's been the past couple of years. But I love that you took control and started something new. I love flying as well. Just one of those things, like small planes. Um I've been in one of those like powered hang gliders before, which is kind of like a motorcycle with
Really?
a hang
Wow.
glider on
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know,
That's
right?
awesome. Yeah, yeah.
So much fun. But I loved to see that. I saw your post about that and I was like, this is super cool. I have another friend who's a drummer who got his pilot's license during this time too. And in Nashville. And I was like, this is cool. This is a thing. It's great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's kind of an expensive hobby, I
yes,
have
yes.
to
I,
say.
I asked about that. I found that out. Yeah.
Yeah, but
It's great.
given the circumstances, for me, it was totally worth it.
Yes,
More than an expense, it was an investment in my mental health, to be honest.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a skill to have, that's just great. And so, another thing that you have had in your life that's an incredible accomplishment is the gymnastics. And I just wanted to touch on that because we talked about this way, way back. And you had shown me some pictures, and I think you've posted pictures over the years as well. But um, how old were you? Was this like college time frame when you were like a competitive gymnast?
Well, I started when I was 10,
Mm-hmm.
and I started, going, 2 times a week, I think, for
Mm-hmm.
an hour or two. And then little by little, I started getting better, and I started liking it quite a bit. And my coach in that little gym said, I'm going to recommend you to this other gym where they have a really good team. And, there's not that much more I can do for you in this gym. So you should go
Mm-hmm.
over there. So I went over there and I auditioned, and, I was pretty good on floor exercise. So I sucked on some of the things that I kind of never did, like pommel horse, for example, was always my
Mm-hmm.
nemesis. But I was pretty good at floor exercise, so they admitted me to their team, and I started training every day, like
Wow.
between 4, 5, 6 hours a day. Yeah, Monday through Saturday, and it was a great um, thing to experience what your body can do if you really, really train it, which is kind of
Mhm.
like playing drums or playing any instrument,
Right.
but gymnastics is pretty extreme in the sense that you are really training your body to do this amazing things that, how can you lift up from the ground and do like two flips with two twists at the same time, and land and stick the land. It's pretty incredible. And I always was a very kind of just I couldn't stay still when I was a kid. I was
Hmm.
always doing little flips and stuff like that, completely untrained. So when I finally started doing gymnastics, I was like, oh man, this is heaven for me. And I
Oh,
loved, and it was also that immersive thing, concentrate uh, all your energy, mental and physical, and try to do this really kind of thing that you're not supposed to be doing. Your body's not designed to do those things, but you train it,
absolutely.
and you can. And obviously, what I got from it, that was kind of feeding on each other. The music and the gymnastics, the discipline side of things,
Hmm.
and how if you focus your energy and you do it and methodically, then how you can start seeing results on the
Hmm.
other side. So I was doing both at the same time, and I was kind of going crazy for a little while because I was doing music school in the morning, which was the conservatory, which I was studying classical piano. I was not studying drums. So drums
Hmm.
I was doing on my own on the side with a private teacher. Then I would
Hmm.
go to the conservatory and do classical piano and all my classical subjects. And then I would go to high school right after that, from like 2 in the afternoon to like 6. And then at 6, I would run to the gym and stay there like until 10. Uh,
Wow.
so it was a crazy, crazy period of my life, but it was just incredible to just to do something and start seeing results and really commit to something. And
Hmm.
especially I feel like most people never commit to a sport at that level. I mean,
Hmm.
you can do a little bit of sports when you're in the high school or in junior high or whatever, but to really, I was in the junior national team, and we
Wow.
were competing and we were traveling and stuff like that. And it was just great to see, what your body can do if you put your mind to it. It was a fantastic experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's like a life lesson too, in general, just like what can be done. I think a lot of people don't start something because it seems impossible.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Luckily, yeah, when you're young and I mean, I was a kid. You're not thinking,
yeah,
too far ahead into the future. So you're just doing it.
you
And
just do
then,
it.
of course, the only bad thing about it is that gymnastics is a wonderful sport, but if you do it a lot, you really get injured. So
Hmm.
I have a lot of little injuries from my gymnastics days, my ankles, my knees, my lower back, especially. That has been kind of an ongoing thing
Hmm.
since I retired when I was 21. So I already had a little bit of a back issue. And then as the years have gone by, it got really bad for a while. Then it got a little better. It's been kind of up and down for years
Hmm.
now. But I have to start doing some research again, because last time I did it must have been like 12 years ago,
Hmm.
going to different doctors and seeing what I can do about my lower back pain. And nobody recommended surgery. Everybody was like, "Yeah, we can see that you're messed up, but you're not
Hmm.
messed up enough for surgery."
Right.
So I've been kind of dealing with that kind of low level pain, but it's
Mm,
constant, you
yeah,
know. So I really would like to do something about it so that my quality of life improves a little bit.
absolutely. Yes. And I think that was the context that we were talking about you being a gymnast in that context because we were talking about your back pain
Yeah,
um, years and years back. But yeah, chronic pain like that can just be something that's uh, long-term annoyance daily. So I hope that that you're able to figure out a fix for that. And I know it's tough
thank you.
when there's not like a clear-cut answer. Like do this and it will fix it completely.
Exactly.
Um,
Sometimes I almost wanted them to tell me, well, if you do not do surgery, then you will not be able to, something that was a
right.
little bit more extreme, so that I had almost no choice.
Mhm.
But right now it's a little bit in the limbo. But uh, the technology has advanced so much in the last
Mhm.
10 years, so that I would like to see again what other choices there are right now versus
Yes,
12 years ago. I'm sure it's a completely different ballgame right now. So
for
we'll see.
sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
but,
Well,
but I can manage. I mean, if I have to be careful. I have to be mindful. I have to be aware of what I'm doing, my
mhm.
posture. And a lot of people tell me, "Man, it's just your posture is so good when you're playing." And the thing is, if it's not, then it starts hurting. So that's
Sure.
kind of like a thing that I have to do in order for me to be okay. But when I wake up in the morning, for example, I have to slouch my back like for 20 minutes, and I can really go into a C. I mean, my back is pretty amazing how flexible it
Mhm.
can be. And then
Mhm.
I start the pain start kind of going away little by little, and then I'm kind of okay. And then I do a lot of um, conditioning and flexibility and stuff. So it's manageable, but it could definitely be better.
That's good. It's good to know that it's manageable. Those stretches, like the cat pose, and then, the opposite of it, the yoga stretches, I always found, really
Yeah,
great for back. And I think it's a drummer thing, like back pain also,
yeah,
like
yeah,
you
for
said,
sure.
if your posture's not correct, and if you're spending a lot of time sitting at the drums, and, if you're reaching too much, I think a lot of those things can affect you, um,
Yeah, and
but
also, because I love doing sports, I used to play squash and high
oh,
lie and all these things. So recently, I was in Mexico and I was playing soccer with my nephew, and then all of a sudden, I just felt like this pain in my inner thigh, my left inner thigh. I'm like, oh, great. So I went to the doctor and I had a little tear. So I'm like, okay,
oh, no.
awesome. And then the tear got better, and then I played squash with my other nephew, and then my ankle. Like, this is like I feel like I'm still young, but then my body's telling me, you got to be careful now.
Right,
And
right.
and
I
and I
know.
also is all those nagging injuries from gymnastics that are still there, and I feel like, oh, I'm just gonna do this real quick without, I know I have to put like a bandage or something in my ankle because it's kind of fragile, and all
Yeah,
these things that I know, but I just get excited because I want to play, and then I
yeah,
pay the consequences. But
yeah, the
you know,
the childlike excitement comes out,
exactly.
but but flying planes, that's a good hobby because you're not, causing injury to yourself, so
Yeah,
that's good.
except if you kill yourself when you if you crash, but
Well, yeah, don't do that. Don't
try not to do that.
don't do that. Oh my goodness. All right, so we're kind of up to date on what you've been up to, which is fantastic. And I just want to like go back in time a little bit and talk about your start in music, when you were super young in Mexico. Um, I think I read that you started playing professionally like as a teenager. Is that right?
Well, professionally in the sense that I was making a little money and I was playing around Mexico and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, when I was 5, the official story is my mother Susana has a brother Nacho. Nacho had a girlfriend Ana, and Ana had a brother Fito, and Fito was a drummer.
Okay.
So one time, Nacho, my uncle, was babysitting me, and then we went to Anna's place, and they opened the door, and the first thing that I saw in the living room was this amazing Ludwig Vistalite kit,
Wow.
like the one John Bonham used to play, and it
Wow.
just looked like a spaceship, and it had all these boom stands like kind of facing inwards, and he had a lot of cymbals like really low. It was just like a like sublime view. I just
Mhm.
fell in love with just the look of it. And then he came downstairs and he started playing. I mean, I remember he played "Whole Lotta Love" on the stereo and was playing along. So to me, that was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then I started taking lessons with him. And my lessons would be to just bring my favorite records, which were all the records my mom was listening to. My mom is still an avid music fan, and she's a rock and roller, all the way. So I was listening to a lot of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, um,
Mhm.
Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix. So that kind of music was the one I kind of wanted to play. So I would bring along my LPs, and he taught me a little bit how of technique, and then we just started doing it. Playing along to the records. So my first experiences were always musical. Um, like playing music, not so much like
Mhm.
chops and concentrating on those kinds of things. But it was
Right.
mainly just to imitate what Ringo was doing or what Charlie Watts was doing or what John Bonham was doing. So it was a really good way to start. And then in the meantime, I was very curious about what the instrument could do without me really knowing it. I mean, I hadn't seen one instructional video, nothing. I don't think those things even existed back then.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I was just sitting on my drums, and I would just start improvising,
Mhm.
and I would spend hours and hours just fooling around. So little by little, I started really kind of falling in love with the idea of improvisation, even though I had nothing to do with jazz at that moment. So it was more coming from the rock and roll perspective, but I was improvising with those tools. And then
Mhm.
when I heard Neil Peart for the first time, and the first album I heard was Exit Stage Left, which has the YYZ uh, legendary drum solo, and
Right.
that was mind blowing. At the same time, I discovered Stuart Copeland. So then my concept of drumming started changing
Mm.
from Ringo and Charlie Watts to all of a sudden be like, wow, this instrument can be very very protagonistic and still
Right.
be able to play music. So I did that for a while, and I got obsessed with just Neil Peart and Stuart Copeland for years, and that's all I wanted to do. And my drums had kind of looked like a mix of both of them. It was the most insanely uncomfortable thing to play. I mean, because I had my double bass drum, but my hi hat was all the way over there, and my legs were completely spread open so that I could, reach. It
Reach
was just
everything.
not. It was not designed really to be played, that thing. But it just looked so cool to me to have two bass
Right.
drums. I had a Tama Swing Star
Mhm.
blue, and then I got this crappy drum set that was really cheap because I all I could afford, but it was also blue. And then I
Yes.
put them together,
Put them
and I had
together. Yes.
this massive kit. And if you look closer, like, wait a minute, there's something.
Yes, I did the same thing as a kid.
Yeah,
I the exact same thing. Yeah,
you have to. I mean, the double bass drum thing is
you have to
something we
do
all
it.
have to go through.
Yes.
So it was not very comfortable to play, but it looked great. And that kid never left my house. Like even if
Mhm.
I had gigs, it would never fit in a car.
Mhm.
So I would always have to bring a small version of that. And I was doing gigs with my little rock bands and stuff around Mexico. So I was playing already when I was my first band that I remember kids coming to my house. I was like 9 or something like
Mm.
that. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So
That's
it
so
was it was
great.
really cool to just be doing it from such a young age.
Absolutely. And how did you mention you were, at the conservatory for, classical piano. How did that transition happen?
Um, well, I saw the movie Amadeus.
Wow,
Yeah,
okay.
and
Mhm.
it blew me away. I was like, wow, man, somebody that young that can write symphonies and operas and stuff like that. It
Mhm.
really fascinated me. The idea of a genius kid like
Right.
Mozart was. So I was very young too. I was still a kid, and I was like, I want to be like that. And my musical diet was rock and roll through my mom, and then during lunchtime, because we live with my grandparents.
Mhm.
During lunchtime, my grandfather would play classical music.
Oh,
So then
okay.
I was always listening to classical music every day, a little bit, and then rock and roll. So those were my two main dietary supplements of music. And then
Right.
when I saw Amadeus, it all kind of uh, made sense to me. Like, wow, classical music, and then I can play drums and blah blah blah. Blah. So yeah, I got myself into the conservatory, and I was just practicing like if I was going to be a concert piano player someday.
Mhm.
But I was playing drums most of the day. So to be honest, I was not the best piano player in school because I had this mistress that was always like going like, no, 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 play me. And
Mhm.
I love playing drums more than I love playing piano. So, at one point I was like, maybe this dual thing. I mean, it's great that I learned to play piano and I learned all these things
Yeah.
about music, But that's when I decided that maybe the best thing would be for me to really pursue drumming and try to go to Berkeley. So that's what happened in 1993. I applied in 1991, I think, and then I left in 1993.
Hmm. Okay, yeah. I mean, it makes so much sense, but it's, I'm sure, served you well having that training on piano in your musical journey, just like
Absolutely.
on drums. That's great.
Absolutely. And I tell all the drummers that I can, or students, you have to play at least a little bit of piano, because piano
Mhm.
has everything. It has rhythm, it has harmony, it has melody. It's very visual, very graphic. You can see it's great for composing,
Mhm.
for producing anything you want to do. If you know how to play a little bit of keyboards, the
Yes.
world is your oyster. And back then, I saw it as, okay, this is classical music and this is jazz, or this is rock, or whatever. And it wasn't until much later that I really started relating things and kind of joining the dots of why it is that this thing is like this. And then I would look back at classical music and like, oh, I start understanding now. For example, when I improvise, my main thing is storytelling,
Mhm.
motivic development. How can I
Mhm.
sustain a 15-minute drum solo without it getting
Right.
boring? And I started grabbing from the things that I learned from classical music, like analyzing Mozart or analyzing Beethoven, and see how they would develop one motif and turn it around, do it slower, do it faster, do it major, do it minor,
Mhm.
um, turn it around like if it was a mirror image of what they just did. So it was just fascinating to learn that. But at the moment, at the time, I didn't really make the connection with what I was trying to do as a jazz musician improvising. So it
Right.
wasn't until many, many years later that I started using what I learned in classical music and applying it to my storytelling as a improvising musician.
Right. And that's incredible to think about because, I think of you as this. I think of jazz when I think of you. I love that you grew up on rock and roll and classical music, and, when I met you, you were playing with, Pat Metheny, and it's just stuck in my head, like, Antonio synonymous with jazz music. But then
Mhm.
all the things that you've done and the Grammy nominated albums and the albums that you've led, and it's like this amazing array of music, and it makes so much sense thinking about you coming from this background where you have really like this depth of musical influence and knowledge, and so it kind of like all comes together, so I can totally see you using that in what you have done yourself over the years.
Yeah, well, thank you. And yes, I think the best thing a musician can do is just kind of realize who you are, where you came from, what your influences are, or what your new thing can be, and combine it all. I
Mhm.
think it's very important, especially as a jazz musician, to try to have your own voice, your own sound. That
Yes.
somebody listens to a record and we're like, oh, this is Miles, or this is Charlie Parker, or this is Chick Corea, or this is Pat Metheny. People that really developed a very strong identity, and just within a couple of bars, you knew who it was. To me,
Yeah.
that was incredible. And same thing with Tony Williams, same thing with Philly Joe, and same thing with Elvin Jones and Max, and all those
Mhm.
guys that really kind of were creating drumming as we know it, at that point. So it was just really a really cool thing to do all the research of why you know I don't know, Jack DeJohnette plays the way he plays.
Mhm, mhm.
Where did that come from, or where Vinny or Dave Weckl or Steve Gadd? I mean, whoever you name it, uh,
Yes,
and you can start tracing back where the lineage, but
absolutely.
for me, when I started playing jazz, it was when I was in the conservatory, and they had an ongoing jazz workshop in there. And I was just practicing my classical piano, and then I would listen to the big band like kind of far away. I was like, wow, that sounds kind of cool. But I was still into rock
Mhm.
and roll. I was not into jazz at all. As a matter of fact, my mom tried to play me an Art Blakey record when I
Mhm.
was heavily into my Russian police phase, and I was like, nah, I don't know. I don't know about there's no backbeat, and I'm not feeling it. It kind of
Sure.
sounds old. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and especially the Rush and Police records were so well produced; they sounded great.
Mhm.
So then I'm trying to listen with those same ears to Art Blakey. It just didn't make sense to me. And of
Right.
course, years later, I was like studying Art Blakey, trying to figure out how he was doing what he was doing, but I was
Yes.
not ready. I was not ready at that moment.
Right, right.
But when I was in that in the conservatory, and I would hear that jazz workshop of the small combos and the big band, blah 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 blah, I started making friends with some of these kids, and one of them, talking to them, he told me, "Oh well, if you like this kind of music, maybe you will like this." And he gave me a cassette, and it's a Chicory Electric Band. And I
Mm.
went home and I checked it out, and it just blew me away because
Yes.
it had a lot of the same elements that I liked from rock and roll, which was, big drum sound and electric instruments, but they were
Mhm.
improvising and playing this incredibly complex music. But I even though I couldn't really understand everything that was going on, the energy really kind of hit me. And I was like, man,
Right.
I want to learn how to do this. So I started getting my hands on every Chick Corea record I could, and then that led me to like Mahavishnu Orchestra, Pat
Mhm.
Metheny Group, John Schofield. So I started getting into jazz through fusion
Sure.
because it was a lot more relatable to me
Right.
uh, at
Yeah.
that moment.
And that's a good
So
transition.
yeah, I mean, it was for me, it was completely logical.
Mhm.
And then I went to Berkeley in 1993, and my idea was to really become a jazz drummer, but I had a very fusionistic idea of what jazz was supposed to be,
Right, right.
because that's what I was listening to in Mexico. And I was not really studying with anybody at that point. So yeah, I was just self-taught. I
Mhm.
bought the Weckl instructional videos and the Dennis
Mhm.
Chambers instructional video. And I was just trying to copy everything that I could, you know. And I started working a lot on my technique. So by the time I got to Berkeley, I had pretty good I had chops,
Yeah.
but I was doing my double bass drum and two hi hats, and it was a very very fusionistic approach to the
Yes.
whole thing. And here I was in my jazz ensembles with that massive kid, and the
Mhm.
teachers would be like, "What have you been listening to?" Because we were supposedly playing uh, jazz or bebop, but I
Mhm.
really had no conception on how to play that. And then one day, which was I always tell this story on my clinics because it's a very good illustration of where I was at the moment. So I was walking around my stick bag and around Berkeley, and my this teacher Ron Savage, he saw me and he was like, "Oh, you're a drummer, right?" Because I see your stick bag. I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's happening?" I said, "Well, I have an 8 semester bebop ensemble, and the
Mhm.
drummer didn't show up. Do you want to play?" I'm like, "Sure." And I went to get my drums, and I had this massive Yamaha Power V Special kit.
Yes, I
Yeah,
have that kit
you had one.
still. I do.
So it was my first kit in Boston because I didn't bring a kit from Mexico, so I bought like a used, very cheap Power V Special, but it was
Mhm.
big sizes with
Yes,
22-inch bass drum,
yes.
10, 12, 14 power toms. And I remember the tom holder that goes on the bass drum was
Yes,
massive. I
it's
mean, you could
huge,
kill
yeah.
somebody with that thing. I was like, wow, this is a great weapon. So I brought my whole kit and I started setting up all my cymbals. I had like 7 cymbals. I remember all were very shiny, very bright sounding. My two
Yeah.
hi hats, my double bass drum pedal, and all the kids were looking at me like, "What is going on over here?"
Mm,
Because it's a bebop ensemble. But I was first semester; there were 8 semesters, and I had
yeah.
never really played bebop with people that knew how to do it. So, but I kept thinking, man, I'm just gonna impress the hell out of all these kids right now. and they put sheet music in front of me. It said Pent Up House. I was like, wow, I've never seen this, but I knew how to read music because I came from the conservatory, but I didn't know how to interpret drum charts
Hmm.
or lead sheets. You know, I didn't know exactly what to do with that information, but I could tell there was a melody and there was some letters on top where the chord changes, but I didn't really never really dealt with chord changes before. So I was a little confused, but you know, they said, okay, swing. So the teacher starts going like that, and me coming from Mexico and playing rock, that to me was always one and three. You
Hmm.
know, so all of a sudden he goes like one, two, one, two, three, and I was like, what? They count backwards over here. Everything's different in this country. You know? I was totally blown away by it. And well, I came in, I started playing, and as soon as I started feeling more or less comfortable, I just started kind of trying to show off, you know,
Hmm.
just trying to impress
Hmm.
everybody by playing a lot of chops, and they immediately called my bluff, you know, especially the Ron, and he started just taking things away from me from my drum set. Basically, he started tearing my whole drum set apart.
Hmm.
It only left me with hi hat, bass drum, snare drum, and right cymbal.
Hmm.
And he was like, "Okay, now let's hear you solo." And of course, you know, I couldn't do absolutely anything, and that was a huge wake up call for me because I
Yeah.
realized how much I had been relying on just my specific setup, and I didn't really know how to, uh, you know, play and improvise without all those elements that I knew how to do my licks and my patterns. And if you took that away from me, I was kind of done. So
Yeah.
it was a great learning experience. And then from there, I started having a little bit more of a humble attitude towards music. It was a huge blow to my ego, but it was one of the best things that could have happened to me at that moment.
Sure. Yeah, and, like, what an endorsement for, great teachers and instructional situations like that. I love Ron Savage. Shout out to Ron Savage because he's
Yeah,
so
Ron is
great.
the best.
He's
Yeah,
so great.
he's great, and he really. I mean, he could tell first that I was utterly depressed by what had just happened,
Yeah,
and
of course.
he was not, you know, feeling happy about it. He
Mhm,
saw that I was sad, and he was like, "Man, let me talk to you for a second."
mhm,
Everybody had left already, and he said, "You know, I can tell that you put a lot of work into your instrument, so I respect
mhm.
that. But let's just focus on what you need to listen to or what you work on if you want to play
Right,
this music." And then he
right.
gave me a big discography, and one of the things that really kind of blew my mind the same way like the Chicory Electric Band blew my mind, or Rush blew my mind, or Led Zeppelin blew my mind, was Miles Davis with Tony Williams, Ron Carter, George Coleman, and Herbie. Um, My Funny Valentine 4 and More, the live album in Town Hall, which I had no idea what they were doing, but I felt the same energy. And I was like, I don't know what's happening here, but I
Yes,
can see it's something very different from what I've been listening to. Because
right.
the whole band was really morphing, like if it was like this bubble of energy. And
Mhm.
it was just fascinating how they could switch. The whole band could switch in a second from one vibe to another vibe. And I was like, I want to learn how to do that. And that's when I
Mhm.
really started focusing into just real improvisation.
Yeah, and I think of you as an amazing improviser, and also, like, when I think about your kit and the way that you play and the sound, the tones, things like that, it's, like, it's transitioned so much from that time period. I mean, I could picture you, you know, darker, warmer tones in the instruments that you play, and then always getting incredible sound out of, even if you're just if you're even if you're playing a small kit with,
Oh,
like,
thank you.
one cymbal. Yeah, I mean, and so it's just amazing over the years, how that's transitioned. I also love that you had the Power V kit too, because that was like the kit, right?
That was the kid. I mean, to me, it was just cheap and big,
Yes,
and it
yeah.
sounded good. And I was like, man, this is the kid for me.
Yeah, that was my first kit as well. So great. But and I think about, like, the work that you did on Birdman as being so so like different and out there and innovative. So I feel like it's inspirational to hear where you came from playing in a really specific way and the way that you transitioned into like basically being able to do anything.
Well, I mean, to me, that's the essence of being a jazz drummer. Uh,
Mhm.
to me, jazz nowadays is just the medium that has helped me just do whatever the hell I want to do,
Right.
and not only drumming wise, but also compositionally. So
Mhm.
if you know enough about rhythm, about melody, about harmony, and you have good references in your mind of what sounds good and what doesn't
Mhm.
sound good,
Mhm.
and that of course listening to all the masters, from the very beginning to the young masters of today,
Mhm.
listening to everybody, and then you have a lot of points of reference of like, you know is this up to, does this pass the smell test, if you're writing
Right.
something, or if you just improvise something, am I doing something with depth here, or is it just, I'm just kind of blowing chops, or am I, that kind of self-awareness, I think, is incredibly important
Mm.
for
Mhm.
any musician, because you know nowadays, with all the information that there's out there, I mean, everybody has points of references, but it just depends on if you have been listening to the right stuff or not.
Mhm.
So I was lucky to still be part of the generation that was mentored by people, so played,
Yes.
18 years with Pat Metheny, like a few years with Gary Burton, with Chick Corea, with Paquito de Rivera, with my Latin years in the beginning, that was playing with Danilo Perez, with David Sanchez, with Miguel Senon, that was heavily, heavily Latin influence, but it was very, very deep. It
Yes.
was not just your average Latin jazz. These guys were kind of transforming the way Latin jazz was being played and conceptualized. So I had to know all the rules of Latin music, Afro-Cuban, Brazilian, Panamanian, Puerto Rican. Um, it was a great, great immersive time for me to learn all those things. But then when we would play Latin music, we would play it with a totally jazz approach. So it
Mhm.
was very open. But if you didn't know the rules and how the clave worked, you couldn't do it. You know,
Right.
you couldn't just play the patterns because we were opening up as if it was bebop, basically.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the interaction and everything was coming from jazz, but all the rhythms, all the patterns were coming from Latin music. So that was a great time for me to really develop that vocabulary. And I feel like now my playing is totally influenced by that still, but it has transformed so much that you can really recognize, oh well, that comes from Latin, or this comes from Afro-Cuban. It just has kind of uh, come out in my playing without me really thinking about it too much. It's just I did so much of it that now it's just there. But
Yes.
also all my rock playing is kind of there, and then all my bebop playing is there. So basically now what I try to do is just let all of that come out and use jazz as the main uh, medium for me to be able to express all those things. But if I
Mhm.
love just like locking into a really heavy backbeat, or into whatever it is that is needed at the moment, or that I hear in my head at the moment. And I think a lot of jazz musicians, they try to be so cryptic all the time in their playing. Like,
Mhm.
if I can be so complex that nobody understands what I'm doing, that's great.
Right.
And I used to think that for a few years. uh, I would sacrifice musicality for the sake of complexity, and
Mm.
I was like, man, we're so killing right now, I'm sure nobody can understand what we're doing. Me, that is horrible nowadays. you
Right.
know I want to relate to people. I don't want to leave them behind. I
Mhm.
want to bring them with me in the journey,
Yes.
whatever it is that we're doing. I want them to be there with us.
Yeah.
And I used to enjoy myself when I could feel the audience being like, wow, man, what is going on over here? You know,
Hmm.
now I want them to understand what I'm doing, because at the end of the day, music and whatever it is that you're doing as a musician, as a drummer, you're just trying to communicate something. And if you are not communicating it, then I feel like you're failing in your mission to just put yourself out there in a way that people will be able to relate to in some way, you know. And I think jazz has become smaller and smaller and smaller audiences, because it can be so cryptic. So
Hmm.
I feel like jazz now is going through a better period where it's being fused with hip hop, with rock, with more groove music that
Hmm.
is making it a little bit more accessible.
Yes.
And I think that's a good trend.
I like that. I like that, and I can see that with you as well, Antonio, because anytime I've seen you play or present a master class, it's relatable. You're, like, imparting knowledge that's understood to the audience, and I think that's really important, not just in, like, a drumming situation, but, like, in a musical situation. I love to see music where I feel something, I feel a connection there. I
Exactly.
feel that communication, and I love
Yeah.
that, and,
To me, that's
you know.
that's the most important part. Like in the beginning of my clinics, I usually ask, how many drummers in the house, and
Mhm.
then everybody raised their hand. And
Mhm.
my second question was like, how many musicians in the house?
Yes.
And they're like, they don't know if they should raise their hand or not. And I said, well, that's the first mistake. You should consider yourselves musicians that just happen to play drums.
Mhm.
But you cannot be a musician unless you know how to play music, how to communicate musical ideas through your instrument.
Right.
So one of my favorite parts that I've been doing in the clinics is like, I explain about motivic development, about melody, repetition, how to use space.
Mhm.
For a drummer, it's very hard to leave space. Sometimes you feel
Mhm.
like you leave one bar of space and it's, oh my God, it's, so much space. It makes you feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So I try to tell them that they have to make space their friend. Space can work to your advantage in like the most beautiful ways if you know how to use it, and
Yes.
dynamics and all that stuff. So I usually bring it. I ask for a volunteer. It can be somebody that is a total pro, or somebody that has been playing drums for 2 months, and I have them, okay, play something, and then they usually play something, and okay, play it again. And if they can't, then I'm like, okay, so that's your first mistake. You have to be
Mhm.
able to remember what you just played, because you're going to have to repeat it. And then they play something simple, and then, okay, play it again. And they're able to repeat, okay, so now play it slower, play it faster, play it softer. Now add something at the end. And I give them a few little pointers. And at the end of those 5 minutes that I spend with them on stage with everybody watching, everybody can tell the difference that they are making music.
Mm. Mhm.
To me, that's one of the most beautiful moments, when somebody that is doing it is like, oh wow, yes, I see what's happening here, because I
Yeah.
just played the same thing, and then I left space, and then that gave me time to think, and then I repeated it, but I added a thing at the end.
Mhm.
So, and then the next time around, I'll play it a little softer, and then I add a different thing, and then they start kind of seeing the line of the idea, and then you can see it in the audience too. They're like, oh, I understand what's happening now. So I was like, okay, that's how you make music. It's very simple, and you don't have to be an expert technician in order to start making music. You can
Yeah.
sometimes the best little solos that happen in this kind of situation are the guys that almost don't know how to play,
Mhm.
because they're not really focusing on what my hands can do. They're focusing on just the sound of the
How it
idea, and
sounds.
then they have to play simpler because they don't have that much technique, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
sometimes yields the best results: simplicity and then clarity of ideas. So to me, that's one of the main things that I always try to drill on drummers. you know Music, music, music. Every
Mhm.
time you practice, you can practice musically, even if you're doing just patterns, or you're practicing with a metronome. you can make it musical, play with
Mhm.
dynamics. How is your volume? How's your ride cymbal volume versus your hi-hat volume, and why are you stumping on the bass drum like that? you
Right.
know
Right.
so those kinds of little things, like every time you practice, even if you're practicing independence with a metronome, whatever it is that you're doing, you can do it in a musical way, and that is gonna drill it into your head that every time you sit
Mhm.
on the drums, you can do all these things. Otherwise, you're practicing at home a certain way, you get to the gig and you haven't been doing it. You haven't been playing with dynamics, you haven't been playing you know over the blues form, with
Mhm.
trying to do motivic development. You haven't practiced those things, so
Right.
how do you expect to kill it on the gig, all of
Right.
a sudden? So I tell
Absolutely.
them, you have to practice those things at home. Practice over all the things you are, in a few different tempos, and then sing the melody while you're playing. If you do that at home, when you get to the gig, you would have already done it a few times, and it's not going to be like nerve wracking, and you're actually going to be able to make some music.
Yeah, that's great advice. Really, really great advice. And I just like what you just said. I want to go back and touch just for a minute on the Birdman soundtrack because and I know you've talked at length about this and answered lots of questions about this, but um to me, and I know I've said it on this podcast a bunch of times, I'm really, really into movie soundtracks. I feel like it can make or break the movie and when you have
Mhm.
a really great soundtrack, it just enhances the story. You know, so, so, so much. And thinking about the Birdman soundtrack, I mean, you had to carry the feeling of the entire movie on the drums and talk about making it musical, making the drums musical. It is the perfect example of that, I think, because you're
Thank you.
literally telling a story for the entire span of the movie using just the drums.
Yeah, but you know what I realized was cool about what happened was that in the beginning I tried, when Iñárritu, the director, he told me, okay, make me some demos, do something fast, something energetic, something pensive, something slow, just give me different vibes. And I
Mhm.
was really going about it like if it was going to be a film score that had themes, right? So every time Michael Keaton came on the screen, I would have this rhythmic theme happening, this beat, right?
Mhm.
And then when Ed Norton came on the screen, then you would hear a different beat.
Mhm.
So I was trying to go about it like that. And I sent him the demos, and he said, "Man, I love the demos, but they're exactly the opposite of what I'm looking for. That's not at all where I'm going with this." And then that really puzzled me. I was like, "Man, I'm kind of lost. I don't know what to do." So
Right.
he said, "I'm looking for just more organic, improvised, jazzy." And then when he said
Mhm.
that, I was like, okay, so then maybe I just need to be myself. I'm
Mm.
trying to do things in a way that is not what I would normally do.
Right.
So maybe I just need to react to whatever it is that I'm seeing or it's happening the same way I would react, like if I'm playing with a band. Like
Right.
that, now the medium is different. But as a jazz musician, I've been training to react to whatever is happening in front of me in the moment.
Right.
That's the most valuable asset that a jazz musician, well, any musician should have. Adaptation to whatever is going on in front of you.
Mhm.
So the way it happened is the first demos we did were without the movie. The movie had not been shot yet. They were starting to.
Mhm.
We went into the studio, just the director and me, and we worked off of the script completely. So he would explain all the scenes to me, and he would just have me improvise over that. So I would be
Oh.
imagining, according to what he just told me, he's in his desk and he's doing this, and then he gets up and then goes through the hallway, opens the door. So I'm thinking about that, and he's sitting in front of me in the studio because I told him, please, let's imagine the scene together so I can get the timing right.
Mhm.
So I'm going to be improvising, but whenever you see that the character open the door, please raise your hand so that I can
Wow.
see that okay, that's where you are in the scene. So I would be just looking at him while I was improvising, and then he would go like that, and he has his eyes closed, and he would go like that. Okay, so now he opened the door, so I would do a crash and then go into a different thing, and it was just very intuitive and very organic. You know, just the
Yeah.
way I usually try to play, and that really started working. So we did all those scenes. We did the whole movie just with the script, and then when they had already shot the film and that they had a rough cut, then they superimposed those demos on top
Mm-hmm.
of it just to see what worked and what didn't. And then we did everything again from beginning to end, but now looking at the film. And of course, the director had chosen the things that he really liked about the demos, and then the things that he didn't like. Then we talked about it, and then we did it in a different way. But one of the cool things was that he told me, you know, the demos, even though they're great, they sound really good. Like your drums sound really good. And this
Mm.
movie happens in the bowels of an old Broadway theater. So
Mm-hmm.
like the drums sound too pristine for what we're seeing. So how can you make your drums sound old and they've been in storage for 50 years, you know? So I was like, okay, that's a good challenge. So then I started just like taping drums, and I would put a T-shirt on it and just detune them just to kind of make them sound as
Yeah.
crappy as I could. I started stacking cymbals to make them sound really
Mm-hmm.
trash and
Mm-hmm.
old, and that started working really well with the vibe of the movie and with the image. So then we did everything from beginning to end, and of course now because we were looking at it, now he would give me very specific instructions like, okay, whenever
Mm-hmm.
you see it hitting the wall the third time, you know, give me something big there. So you know, I'll be looking while I'm improvising, and then oh, one two, you know, and then I
Yeah.
would do something like, and it was just very because it was all so organic. It was very easy. You know, I we
Yeah.
did the whole thing in a day and a half, just like me
Wow.
just doing a bunch of takes of each thing, and
Mm-hmm.
then they chose what they liked the best, and it was just a crazy experience to just to hear my drums to begin with in the movie theater,
Mm-hmm.
because I did it, and then I went on tour. We were on tour with Pat like for 8 months that year,
Yes.
and I knew the movie had opened, but we couldn't see it because we're in Asia, and it was not
Oh
going to be in
no.
Asia for a while. So I
Right.
started seeing reviews of like the score is so blah blah. I'm not like, because honestly, when I saw the rough cut, it didn't have color correction. It was not edited. It had my previous drums, like the demo
Mm-hmm.
drums. So when I saw it, it didn't really quite hit me. You know, I
Right.
was like, well, it's an interesting movie, but it was not finished at
Yeah.
all.
Right.
So then I did the second round of the I did the second session, and I left. So I never saw the finished product. So then finally I came home, and Tana and I went to a movie theater in New York in Chelsea like at 2 in the afternoon, because I wanted to be there with nobody. You know, I just wanted to be there by myself, basically with Tana,
Mm-hmm.
and we're there, and then all of a sudden the movie starts, and the first thing I hear is my voice in Spanish in the very beginning of the movie. Is the first thing you hear, and I was like, what the hell is this? And then all of a sudden my drums start coming in with all these letters that start kind of creeping
Mm-hmm.
into the screen, uh, and just to hear my drums in surround sound,
Yes.
they
Yes.
EQ'd the hell out of. I mean, they sound so good, and I was just blown away. I couldn't believe it. I
I
could not.
bet. I bet
Yeah.
you were. I didn't know that that was your voice. I'm going to have to go back and listen to the beginning again, and I'll listen to the whole thing again, but I saw the movie on a flight. And I remember just having some like great headphones on, and I think I had a smile on my face the entire time. Like it's a really kind of dark, gritty film,
Very, very.
and but I was just like, "This is the greatest!" Like, so just so
Yeah.
excited because it was like your drums just and the sounds, and I can hear you talking about the cymbal stacking and like, tape on the drums and stuff, and it just yeah, it did sound like a kit It sounded like the drums. This is all I could picture is like you go into New York and there's a house kit and the heads are who knows how old and
Yeah, whatever
but
you
like
got, that's
right?
yeah,
Like that's what it sounded like to me. It is so good because it was so um organic, like you just said. It was just perfect. So I don't
yeah.
know. I could go on and talk about that. Anyone who has not seen the movie Birdman, go check it out. And I never caught you in one of your performances playing to the movie because you did some of those like live performances
Well,
playing
I've
the
been
movie.
doing that ever since,
Yes.
and it's kind of still the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, I
Yes,
just did
please keep doing
huge
that.
show in Mexico in the beginning of December. Outdoors. So
Mhm.
it's something that I think I will probably keep doing for the rest of my life
Good.
because it's so unique,
It
and and
is.
and it's like a really weird combination between like a almost like a rock jazz show with a movie. So it's kind of
Mhm.
interactive, but the great thing is that it's only me on stage.
Mhm.
So I played, for example, Disney Hall, the National Auditorium in Mexico. I play like the most amazing concert halls all by myself, uh,
Wow.
which I cannot even get with my own band. I
Right.
cannot, get a gig in those places with my band. But with the movie, I can. And I usually ask, is it the first time that there's only a drummer on stage for the whole evening? And most of the time, the answer is like yes, because there's
Oh,
solo piano concerts or whatever. But when do you ever have a solo drum concert? Never. So
right.
uh, I've been incredibly lucky to be able to do this for years now, and
Yes.
it's fascinating to do it every time, and I can change it up as I want to. And of course, I try to keep the dramatic effect that was achieved in the movie, but I one of the cool things about this particular project is that because the spirit of improvisation was there from the beginning, that's what the
Mhm.
director. Then when I do it in front of different people in different halls, different theaters, of course, I want to keep the same spirit. So then I improvise the whole thing, and then at the end, I do once the movie ends, I do like a 15 or 20-minute solo all by myself with no
Mhm.
moving. I just keep going since the audience is there. I started saying like, well, it's a great opportunity to just keep playing. I
Yeah.
used to finish with the movie, but then after a while, I was like, man, I read a review that said, great, but I wish I could have heard Antonio improvise a little bit more.
Wow.
So
Okay.
then I was like, okay, why not?
Well, let's do
And,
that. Yeah.
and I started doing 15, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And also the really cool thing is that when you think about it, how many people have heard a drum solo that lasts more than a few seconds? Unless you go to a jazz gig, even if there's an
Yeah.
open drum solo, is not a 20-minute drum solo.
Right.
You know, it's very rare to hear
Mhm.
that. So to all of a sudden have all these people that are not necessarily jazz audiences, but they just want to see the movie,
Mhm.
and I give them 20 minutes of drums. This is exactly when all that motivic development and storytelling comes into play for me. I love to
Right.
not have a specific thing that I know I want to do, and just kind of start from scratch, and using the tools that I know how to use, just play a completely different drum solo every time I do it. And then I usually come outside and I come out and talk to people. And before COVID, I would sign things, blah blah blah, blah, talk to people.
Mhm.
And one of the most beautiful things that they would say to me is like, I never knew drums could do this. I never heard a drum solo, and I just didn't know that drums could sound that way. You know,
Wow.
so to me, that was the best compliment. Somebody that had absolutely no knowledge of drums or jazz or anything, just to be able to enjoy a 20-minute drum solo. That
Mhm.
that's what we were talking about earlier about communication. If you
Yes.
don't do that and you just play a drum solo with a bunch of licks and chops and like, well, I've been to a million drum clinics where after 2 minutes I'm like, man, there's no music in this. It's just kind of
Sure.
drums and drums and drums. So to me, the biggest compliment is when I can sustain a long solo for somebody that has absolutely no knowledge of drums, and keep them
Right.
entertained, and communicate to
Yeah.
them.
That's a huge compliment. I love that, and please keep doing that so I can actually see you
You
perform
have
that. Because, um, and before we go, because I know we're going long, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about your, 2017, Grammy-nominated Bad Hombre album, because I feel like that's the culmination of all of the things we've talked about today, your musical history and coming from Mexico and come in living in the US and all of the things that kind of made you coming out in this album.
yeah.
Which is an incredible album. It's so much like a story contained in this album, and I want to kind of like point people to that. I'll put a link in the description and in the podcast notes as well, so that people can check that out if they haven't heard it, because it's so good.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I really also feel like that album, because that was after Birdman.
Mhm.
So obviously, when I saw the reaction to the Birdman soundtrack, I was like, what else can I do that has the drums as the main ingredient, but it's not just a bunch of drum solos.
Mhm.
I hate those kinds of albums that is just a vehicle to show, all your soloing skills. I mean, if you show them in a musical way, I'm all for that. But drum records sometimes tend to be a little boring to me. I much rather listen to just music. I don't
Mhm.
care what the drums are doing. If they're doing a lot, that's great. But if they're just doing what needs to be done for the music, that to me that's much better. But
Sure.
anyway, this album came about me wanting to do something with the protagonist being the drum set, and then trying to figure out how to do it so that it would be a very experimental thing for me, something
Right.
that was completely different than anything I've done before. So I had my band Migration, and we had been doing a bunch of albums. I would write a lot of music, and it was usually bass, drums, piano, saxophone, voice. When Tana joined the band too, and it was a great vehicle for my writing. But then when I got the home studio, uh, I was like, well, now I have all these tools that I can work with, and just take my time by doing something. Because usually when you go to the studio, you have to go with a very planned day, with a schedule. This day we're going to do this 5 tunes, and then tomorrow it's usually very low budget when you do jazz
Mhm.
records. So you only have a 2 or 3 days in the studio at the most, if you're lucky. So all of a sudden, having my drum set up all the time, fully mic'd, and they sounding great, I was like, man, the sky is the limit now. I really can take my time and do something very, very experimental, and use this opportunity to kind of develop an alter ego almost. Because I was like, okay, I'm not longer the jazz guy. I'm using jazz just as a vehicle to do something crazy, and
Mhm.
with no kind of genre defying. I didn't want to be able to be pigeonholed as, okay, this is electronic thing, or this is you know, I didn't want to be. I didn't want people to be able to pinpoint what style of music
Sure.
that was,
Yeah.
defined genre. So I started just improvising a bunch of stuff, and then chopping it up, and then adding electronics, and just trying to go about it as I went along. I had no idea what was going to come out, but it was a very kind of um, bad period for me in the sense, and for a lot of people, because Trump was the candidate in that moment, and he had
Mhm.
been expressing, um, without much shame, what he felt about foreigners and Mexicans, and how the bad hombres were in this country. They were all rapists. We all know the stories.
Mhm.
And I took the bad hombre, because okay, he thinks Mexicans are bad hombres, so I'm Mexican, so I'm a bad hombre. And then I thought, well, this is kind of cool, because bad, when you're talking about music or jazz, that means that it's cool. Oh man, that's
Hmm.
super bad, right? And then the project was just me, so just one hombre, so bad hombre. I thought it fit perfectly, and I wanted to appropriate also the bad connotation that he was giving it, and make it into something cool. I'm just
Hmm.
gonna make a cool record and name it that. But that all of a sudden opened the door for me in a really cool way, because I was like, wow, this bad hombre thing could be like my alter ego every time I want to do something kind of crazy and out of whack, and that is not really defined by a specific thing.
Right.
Uh, so now what I've done with that bad hombre moniker is that, okay, I take it, and then every time I'm gonna do a solo project where it's just me, like as a mad scientist in my studio, working on whatever it is that I'm doing, but I'm playing all the instruments. I'm also engineering it because I'm the only person down there. I'm pretty much mixing the whole thing. So every time I do a project like that, it's going to be a Bad Hombre project. So that brings me to the new Bad Hombre project that I'm going to put out this record, which will come out in August, end of August of 2022.
Hmm.
That has been postponed already 4 or 5 times because of COVID, a bunch of different reasons. But
Right.
this is it. If it doesn't come out at the end of August, I'm gonna kill myself
Yeah.
because it's just been way too long. I feel like I've been pregnant for 3 years, and I'm
Right.
bloated, in a bad mood, and eating way too much.
No.
So so it's gonna come out in August, and is called Shift Bad Hombre Volume 2. And what I did with this project is that I asked a bunch of different singers and singer songwriters to provide me with a tune. Uh,
Hmm.
so I would just ask them, please give me any song you want. It could be old, could be new, could have been released before, could be a sketch, anything. Just give me your voice, a click track, and
Hmm.
if you want to give me any other element, feel free. But if you don't have to, because I'm gonna grab the voice, and along with the drums, I'm gonna make the voice and the drums be the two main instruments of this
Hmm.
project, without it being, a bunch of drum solos over what you're singing. So just kind of lend me your song, let me do my thing, and then I'll send it to you. Hopefully, you will like it. So the first one was this amazing singer from Mexico, Silvana Estrada, which I heard her in Mexico doing this beautiful song with just her cuatro guitar.
Hmm.
I was like, man, if I could just have that tune. It was in 5/4. It was really really cool, and just play with it, see what happens. I would like to see what results it might yield. So
Hmm.
I asked her, please give me your voice, the click separate, the cuatro separate. She sent it to me, and I worked on it for a couple of weeks, and it just sounded so cool to me. This new sound that I had discovered with it was not my song, so I was kind of detached from it, and I
Hmm.
could do uh, other things with it that maybe the author, if I would have been the author, I wouldn't do, because I'm thinking of the tune in a very specific way. So
Right.
I reimagined the whole thing, and I sent it to her. She loved it, thankfully. So then I asked Trent Reznor for a tune that I met at the Golden Globes when I was nominated for Birdman, and he gave me a tune. And Michelle and Cello. I started just asking a bunch of people, but no jazz people. I didn't want this to be a jazz record at
Hmm.
all. I wanted to be more coming from my rock background,
Right.
but now seen through the lens of somebody that has played years of jazz. So that's going to be the new album. Dave Matthews is on it. Tana, my wife, is on it. Becca Stevens, Lila Downs, the guitar duo Rodrigo Gabriela. It's 12 different artists. My grandfather is in it. He's an actor.
Hmm.
97. He just turned 97, January 15th. So he's a fantastic actor, and he is acting as the MC of the record,
Hmm.
on the opening and the closing. So it's kind of like a everything that I've always wanted to do is in this record, pretty much. So
That's amazing.
hopefully people like it.
It's amazing. I know it's gonna be great. I can't wait. I will have you back on to talk about that when it comes out because there's so much
Please.
to talk about. So yeah, we'll do a part 2 when the new
Sounds
album
good.
comes out. So
I can't wait.
everyone be on the lookout for that in August,
Uh,
and you can follow Antonio on Instagram. I will link everything, and also the album info. I'll make sure I put that in there as well. So we'll
Thank you.
make that happen. Thank you so much, Antonio. It was so wonderful to catch up with you today.
My pleasure, Sarah. And I have to say, I've been following what you've been doing as well since the pandemic started. I remember we did an Instagram live back then, and it
Mhm.
just has been growing. And you've been also growing so much as an interviewer and as a host. So,
Thank
hats
you.
hats off to you as well.
Thank you so, so much. That means the world to me, and I'm having so much fun with this, so I really appreciate it.
I mean, you are really good at it, but you've been getting better and better as time has gone by, and it's an honor to be part of it.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll bring you right back and talk all about the new album. I cannot wait for that.
Can't wait either.
Until then, take care, stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in today. Join us each Tuesday for new episodes of Sarah Hagan Backstage.